first part, which is really a plea to everyone. I mean, having come here again today, I'm forcibly reminded, as I was 4 years ago, of how much knowledge there is in this room. You know, people have unearthed all sorts of material from various places and obviously have niche interests and broader interests and so on. And quite a few of you have contributed to the echo, and if I can encourage anyone else, don't please think, oh well, you know, someone's always going to know a lot more about the subject than I do, and so on and so forth. There's people at all levels reading the journal, so it's of great interest if we can have a good spread of knowledge and articles in the journal. And if it doesn't appear in the next edition, we'll hold it over to the following one, and so on and so forth. So we've got a few in the pipeline at the moment, which I'm going to be looking at when I get back and editing and so on. But please, if you do feel the creative urge come upon you, don't fight it.
What kind of articles are you looking for?
It can be anything. We've had, you know, there's in-depth articles on the autopsy, we've got general articles, we've had crosswords, we've had word searches. Basically, send it in and let's have a look at it.
Book reviews.
Yeah, book reviews are always welcome, particularly. But again, as I say, having heard people speaking today, you know, there's an awful lot of knowledge there. Share it with others, please. And the journal's a good way of doing it in a tangible way that people can refer to in the future. So, yeah, please do. Right, mine isn't a presentation as such, because I just said to Stuart beforehand, when we had the changes to the format for today, I said, well, I do have a half-an-hour documentary that I came across, an audio documentary, which I suspect quite a few of you may not have heard. I hadn't come across it. Now, as I age, I'm accruing a greater and greater number of eccentricities, as anyone who knows me will gladly testify. And one of those is in the dark reaches of the night. I quite often have the World Service on. And lo and behold, there was this documentary a few months ago on the Warren Commission. Oh. And coincidentally, it's 54 years ago yesterday that your favourite work of fiction and mine was foisted on the American public, so it seems timely to look at it. We're all familiar with it and its shortcomings, I'm sure, but just by way of a bit of context, it's probably wise to remember that this is the document that Gerald Ford trumpeted as the monumental record of the Presidential Commission will stand like a Gibraltar of factual literature through the ages to come. No one can accuse him of trying to short sell it here, can he? Hoover's man on the committee. Of course, 30 years passed, by which time Norman Mailer likened it to a decomposing whale washed up on a beach, which is probably close to the truth. Now, this Gibraltar was the same report, of course, which prompted Senator Richard Russell to simply say, "We have not been told the truth about Oswald."
Oh, that's true.
Now, the ARRB in 1998, in their closing chapter, said that well before 1978, President Johnson, Robert Kennedy, and 4 of the 7 members of the Warren Commission harboured some level of scepticism about the Commission's basic findings. So bear that in mind when you're listening to it being lauded in the programme. Having said that, the interviewer who's carrying out the interviews with Warren Commission Council members does seem to know something about the subject. He's not just a complete newbie. You can tell from the way he's questioning them, so that makes a nice change. So you might want to stifle your laughter at various points throughout the half hour. When you hear it lauded, don't expect to hear much about the witnesses not called. You know, we all know about the various witnesses. You know, you think of Holland on the overpass, we just, pass over if you like. The discrediting of other witnesses, the bizarre lines of questioning, the bizarre lines of investigation. Of course, we know about Jack Ruby's mother's teeth, fishbone hysterics. In fact, Jim Garrison, I just took a photo of the page from Heritage of Stone this morning, where he talks about nothing is more illustrative of the cosmic irrelevancy of the government's inquiry than the index to testimony at the end of volume 15 of the Commission's hearings. Many hours could be spent thumbing through this index and attempting to guess how these names found their way into the aimless, wandering testimony. Xavier Cougar, Eleanor Roosevelt, Heinrich Himmler, Herbert Hoover, Rudy Valley, Leo Tolstoy, Theodore Roosevelt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Che Guevara, and Frank Sinatra, both senior and junior. Absolutely bizarre. And then the other huge irrelevancies, you know, the number of questions, comparing the number of questions asked to Jack Ruby's cleaner compared to the number of questions asked to absolutely vital witnesses. And, you know, the going off record, the removal of the stenographer from the room. I mean, it's endless, endlessly entertaining at any rate. Two books that I'm digging into with some relish at the moment. One which I've had a while and haven't picked up, because it's Breach of Trust by Gerald McKnight. And I think it's always interesting.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. And very, very readable. If you haven't got it or haven't read it, do invest in it. There's a paperback version out now, and it's well worth a read. It's really absorbing. But the information that comes to light, that even you think of yourself maybe in your more charitable moments as a bit of a seasoned researcher and so on, I hadn't realised. We all realised, of course, that there was no recording made of the Oswald interviews. It was only Fritz's hopeless notes made at the time. But then, buried away in Breach of Trust is the fact that Gerald McKnight unearthed the fact that when Marina Oswald was interviewed by the FBI at the Five Flags Motel, was it? No. That those interviews were recorded in full, and they have a National Archive reference number and so on.
It's a bit like Oswald having a proper autopsy.
Yeah, precisely. It's very bizarre. And just a little quote before we go into the programme from another good book, Walt Brown's The War and a Mission. It's very good because, of course, it goes through it in forensic detail, but it's quite pithy as well, and he's very humorous, of course, he's Walt Brown. So he not only fillets the report, but he injects quite a lot of humour into it. He talks about the discrediting of witnesses, especially a TV camera crew who indicated that they saw Ruby on several occasions on the morning of 24th of November at police headquarters. And yet they would have us believe that Howard Brennan not only saw but identified Lee Harvey Oswald. In the report it says the possibility of a prior acquaintanceship between Ruby and Oswald has been suggested by some persons who viewed the shooting on television and believed that a look of recognition appeared on Oswald's face as Ruby moved towards him in the basement, which I think was mentioned this morning.
A lot more than that.
Yeah. Many people had reason to suspect but were not able to prove a relationship between Oswald and Ruby, and yet it came to mind because of a fraction of a second glance that might have been totally innocent, is to avoid the larger issue by easily disproving the smaller one. Frequently, those responsible for the allegations of a Ruby-Oswald connection, this is a report again, have proved to be persons of erratic memory or dubious mental stability. But then by the same token, Helen Markham, Howard Brennan and Mary Bledsoe all just barely missed winning the Nobel Peace Prize for Physics. You know, so it's well worth a read. But anyway, back to the programme. So, Dark Reaches of the Night and the BBC World Service. I think it will be loud enough for everyone to hear.
The officers of the Veterans of Foreign Wars organisation occupy a low-rise building here at 200 Maryland Avenue, northeast Washington, D.C. It's a quiet part of town near the US Capitol. But in late 1963, this building became home to a group of people employed to investigate in depth one of the most shocking events in American history. A murder had taken place in Dallas, Texas.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
We heard a shot. I turned to my left. I was sitting in the jump seat. I turned to my left to look in the back seat. The president had slumped. As I turned, I was hit.
I repeat, a shooting in the motorcade in the downtown area.
Did you see the man who did this?
No, sir, I did not see the man who did it. All I did was look in the man's face when he was shot there and saw that expression on his face and grabbed himself and slide. I'm positive it had hit him. I hope it didn't, but I'm positive it had hit him, and he went all the way down in the car.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
A week after President John F. Kennedy was shot dead, his successor, Lyndon Johnson, set up a commission to study and report upon his death and that of the alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald had, in turn, been shot dead by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. I'm Vincent Dowd, and for the BBC World Service, I'm looking back at that investigation. We'll ask why it's so often been branded inadequate or even a cover-up. And we'll hear from those who worked on it and who, in rare interviews, deny that charge absolutely. But has anything we now know, especially about Oswald's links to the FBI and the CIA, ever given them second thoughts about the events of November 1963? The man quickly appointed to head the commission was US Chief Justice Earl Warren. He'd given the eulogy for President Kennedy in the rotunda of the US Capitol building here in Washington.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a great and good president, has been snatched from our midst by the bullet of an assassin. What moved some misguided wretch to do this horrible deed may never be known.
It's noteworthy that already the Chief Justice was suggesting to Americans what lay behind the murder of their 35th president might remain a mystery. It's over half a century since the Commission delivered its report, so the actual commissioners are no longer alive, men such as former director of the CIA Alan Dulles and Congressman Gerald Ford, who of course later became president himself. But I'm delighted that three former members of staff are with me here in Washington: Bert Griffin, Sam Stern and Howard P. Willans. Howard, you were the most senior.
Only because I was at the Department of Justice at the time, and after the commission got organized, the Deputy Attorney General more or less volunteered me to go to the commission and help it get organized and operational.
And Sam Stern, you were tasked with researching, I think, a very particular area.
The most important was the awareness of Oswald by U.S. intelligence agencies before the assassination, presidential protection, and what might be done to improve it. And the third was the history of our presidential assassinations.
Bert Griffin, your main task, at least initially, was to research Jack Ruby?
That's right. We were concerned with whether he was involved in any way in a conspiracy to assassinate the president or simply a separate conspiracy to assassinate Oswald.
One of the important decisions made early on was that the commission members were determined not to rely solely on the reports they had received from the various federal agencies involved, the FBI, the CIA, and the Secret Service, to name the three principal agencies. They made the decision to have their own staff that could conduct its own investigation, take testimony, and provide a factual basis on which the commission would base its decisions.
Let me add to that a little if I can, Howard. There was a goal to get diversity, and in 1963, diversity had nothing to do with gender, race, or anything like that, because we were all males, but it was geographic. So they wanted geographic diversity, and they were looking for somebody from the West Coast, from the South, and they needed somebody from the Midwest, and I fell into that.
Sam, was it always very obvious people wanted the results within a few months?
No, I don't think so. I think we began with the mandate to take the time necessary to do a responsible job that would be, in a word, bulletproof to criticism. It was a very exciting job in a routine lawyer's life. To be thrust into this kind of thing was extraordinary.
You're all roughly 30, give or take a couple of years. Did it seem to you you were doing work important to America? And so, if I can use this term, were you pleased to be doing the work?
Yes, I think absolutely. We all felt honored by the request to participate in this. We felt a lot of pressure, and I think I disagree a bit with Sam. In January, only a month after the commission had begun to meet, the press was already demanding results. And although the commission at the beginning was confident enough, including the 4 members of Congress, that they could withstand any exhortations to work harder, by May and June, there was a fair amount of pressure to get the fact-finding portion of the investigation completed as soon as possible.
To me, the most memorable moment of the Commission's work was at the very beginning when we met with the Chief Justice, and the Chief Justice had said to us, "Your only client is the truth." And a lot of people don't understand that. We were determined to find the truth.
The President recognized over time that a federal commission was the only way to forestall individual congressional investigations in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and also investigations by the state of Texas and criminal proceedings in the county of Dallas.
But actually, the
commission was not an investigatory body. It relied largely on what had been discovered already by government agencies and especially the FBI.
Yeah, I would disagree with you, Vincent. It's a frequently made statement that we depended essentially on the fact-finding done by the FBI and Secret Service. What we developed was, in fact, a group of sworn testimony. When the FBI or Secret Service interview people, the person being questioned is not sworn, not subject to cross-examination by anyone. And so it was necessary for the lawyers, and the commission members were all lawyers. They wanted to have a body of sworn evidence taken by the members of the commission themselves. They heard 92 witnesses in person, and they wanted to have the additional factual evidence that the staff collected, which was more than 300 depositions.
Yet, from day one, the way the commission operated had its critics. Lee Oswald, at 24, dead and beyond reach of justice or retribution, was unable to defend himself. The first sustained critique came in Rush to Judgment, a book by the American lawyer Mark Lane. In January 1967, his densely argued work persuaded the BBC to mount a 4-hour TV programme for which Mark Lane flew to London.
I am an American citizen. My president was shot to death in Dallas on November 22, 1963. Together with 64% of the American people, according to a recent Gallup poll, I do not know who killed my president. And I would like to find out who killed him and why he was killed. And I would like to find out, in addition, why it is that my government is unwilling for me and for my fellow citizens to know the truth about the death of my president. And until such time as those unanswerable questions thus far unanswered are answered, I intend to continue to raise these questions.
Mark Lane died in 2016. At first, President Lyndon Johnson had not wanted a commission, but he came to think it was better than leaving it to the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. Howard, do you think at the end of 1963 that Lyndon Johnson was intent that you should put Lee Harvey Oswald in the dock, even though of course he was dead, and find him guilty? Was that Johnson's view of what the shape of the commission should be?
He had some very smart people advising him, and I think quickly recognized that letting Hoover essentially make the decision would prompt a large outcry or protest from people who wanted the government to be more careful, be more thoughtful to the deceased president and his family, and to recognize the national and international concerns about this assassination and what it meant to the United States of America looking forward.
Any finding other than that Oswald had been a or the assassin would have been very unwelcome to the White House.
The facts with respect to Oswald's implication as the assassin were well established by the commission, and they differed in somewhat from the findings of the FBI, and they have withstood scrutiny from several investigative agencies and bodies, including congressional committees, that have looked at those findings over the last 50 years.
But Sam, it's one thing to say Oswald was involved, but it's another thing to say he was working alone. Lots of people have said over the years that the commission, for whatever reason, was too content to rest on the assumption Oswald was working alone.
Oswald's role as the assassin and as the killer of the police officer who tried to arrest him were a slam dunk for the most inexperienced prosecutor. Evidence was overwhelming. And one of the reasons the issue has persisted to this day, and so many thousands of people have devoted themselves to it, is the sheer improbability of striking down the most important man in the world by a complete nonentity, a mixed up, sad little creature. That was really a major part of the commission's work, to see what was behind Oswald, if anything.
If the Warren Commission had been at work years later, new evidence would have needed serious consideration. It would be another 40 years before a fascinating recording emerged of President Johnson talking on the phone to the Southern Democrat Richard Russell a week after the assassination. He strong-arms Russell, an old friend, into working as a commissioner alongside Warren. Lyndon Johnson mentions one thing he'll need the commission to downplay: the suggestion there'd been involvement in the murder of Khrushchev's USSR or of the Cuba of Fidel Castro.
That gets already been announced, and you can serve with anybody for the good of America. And this is a question that has a good many more ramifications than on the surface. And we got to take this out of the arena where they're testifying that Khrushchev and Castro did this and did that, and kicking us into a war that can kill 40 million Americans in an hour. You put on your uniform in a minute, and don't go to give me that kind of stuff about you can't serve with anybody. You can do anything.
But Howard Willan says those who think Lee Oswald was the puppet of a foreign government face an insurmountable problem. There's no convincing evidence.
People don't understand that in order to determine that there is a conspiracy, you have to find facts supporting conspiracy. You have to identify someone who helped him plan the assassination, someone who helped him get the weapons, someone who helped him get the job at the depository, someone that would help him escape, fund him, and motivate him. And none of that was existent, and there was no evidence of that kind in any way, shape, or form. And yes, there were suggestions that, well, the mafia might have been involved, the CIA, a federal agency, might have been involved, or that the far right in Dallas had an interest in killing the president. All those associations were examined.
There's also, I think, comfort in the negative that more than 50 years have elapsed and there has been no evidence of any sort of other people's involvement in the matter.
Let's leap on at least a decade, slightly more than a decade. Things were coming out, partly to congressional select committees, which told us more about Oswald's history of involvement, specifically with the CIA. So, Howard, I'll ask you, because you've written the book History Will Prove Us Right about it, were there things which came out in the mid-70s which made you think, I wish we'd known that?
With respect to the CIA, there's 2 points to be made. First, they deliberately failed to provide any information of some 3 years of efforts beginning in the previous administration to consider assassinating Castro. And so there were people in the CIA, and certainly who met with us, and subsequently the deputy director, with whom I met on several occasions, he acknowledged that he had not volunteered information about these plots because first he thought they were sort of irrelevant, and secondly we had never asked about them. But if we had known that, it would have led to further investigation of what kinds of people were involved, and did any of them have a relationship with Oswald. The second point about the CIA, and one that still is festering, is whether they had records with respect to Oswald, and particularly knowledge of activities in Mexico during his short visit to Mexico of 7 weeks before the assassination that were never explored by us. And my response to that is that the Select Committee in the House of Representatives 15 years later did have access to the CIA records in more detail than we did, examined these issues, and did not find any activity pertain to Oswald's guilt or the presence of any conspiracy.
I went to the CIA and was shown what purported to be all of their files on Oswald.
So they weren't complete?
Apparently not. You know, we were not in a position to probe beyond that. They formally represented that this was the information.
Howard, if the CIA was not telling the full truth in 1964, can we know, given that some documents are still held back, everything they could tell America has been told?
I think they probably have, but I'm glad you referred to the present process of disclosing documents that were not released in full at the time the Commission filed its report or for several decades thereafter. What's significant is that these new disclosures of thousands and thousands of documents which are being reviewed with great discipline by those interested in looking for conspiracies have found no evidence of a CIA relationship regarding Oswald that suggests that the CIA did not act consistent with its own obligations in connection with its investigation of Oswald.
Not everything is put down on paper. And secondly, even now, as you know, we had a big release of papers very recently, but it's certainly wasn't everything.
No, there certainly are going to be additional documents referred, and of course I think the three of us have probably agreed that after all the documents have been released, those who believe there was a conspiracy will not be silenced, but will continue to maintain that of course there was no evidence of a conspiracy released because it would have been destroyed within the government by the relevant agency in order to preserve the integrity of the Commission's findings.
You said yourself, and indeed you said it in print, that the Commission didn't know much of, if indeed anything, about CIA plans to assassinate Fidel Castro of Cuba. Much more has come out since. It could have suggested Cuban motivation for being involved in the assassination of John Kennedy. It's something you would want to investigate.
Castro himself had the final answer to this question. He said, how could I have been so stupid in being supported in any way of the killing of the President of the United States when I knew that the result would be the end to my regime? There is no plausible motive, so I think you can say it was something to be investigated, but the likelihood of Cuban direction or involvement, I think, is simply without support.
So Howard, you've spoken to us about what maybe the CIA didn't say 5.5 decades ago. But the FBI, are there things in retrospect they culpably omitted to tell the Commission?
Well, not only did they culpably admit to tell something was very significant, but they lied about it. And that is that approximately 10 days before Oswald killed the president, he actually visited the FBI office in Dallas and left an angry note for Special Agent Hosty, whose job was to kind of keep an eye on Oswald. Oswald told his wife that he had gone to the FBI office and tried to talk with Hosty. And when we presented that to the FBI, they said that wasn't true. Well, they actually had a note from him which they destroyed. If we had known that 10 days before the assassination, Oswald had gone to the FBI and left an angry note for them, we would have at least been inclined to conclude 10 days before the assassination he wasn't thinking about assassinating President Kennedy. Because what person would expose himself in that way if he was thinking? So that would enable us to focus on that critical last 10 days of what was going on with Oswald. And incidentally, very few of the conspiracy advocates pay any attention to that.
Does the Warren Report, as constituted in 1964, does that go into that area at all?
No, it did not. The FBI director was offended by the conclusion in the report that the investigation of the FBI might have been more and more complete. Whereas we learned 10 years later that in fact he had disciplined a number of his officials and agents for their failures in conducting the investigation of Oswald.
Failures prior to the death of the president. That if they had been conducting these investigations, if they'd been staying on top of Oswald prior to that, that the president might not have been killed.
Yeah, the commission was leery about saying anything so clearly, but I think they did not know the note that Oswald left. And Bert makes one of what I regard as two important points. First, that Oswald didn't have in mind and was not part of a conspiracy to kill the president 10 days before the assassination. Secondly, in my opinion, and I think Bert may disagree to this, I think the failure of the FBI to pursue that note is a major cause for the assassination. That if they had interviewed Oswald, he would not have been in the depository on November 22nd.
Howard, I don't disagree with you on that. And in fact, Hosty never told J. Edgar Hoover that Oswald had left him this note. And Hosty was totally frightened, and so was his superior, who told him to destroy the note, that if Hoover ever found out that Oswald had come in and left this note, they'd have both lost their jobs.
Does any of you expect any important new information can now come out about the matters you investigated more than half a century ago? Or really has the book closed on history?
I think the latter is the case. I do not think that after all these years and the opportunities for deathbed confessions or evidence of some kind that has been kept secret for so many decades would come to light that would shape or influence in any way the conclusions of the Commission.
We live in such uncertain times that who knows? Who knows? strange things happen in our universe, but I wouldn't waste holding my breath for more information. I think what we did was well done and comprehensive and complete.
I agree.
Bert Griffin, Sam Stern and Howard P. Willems. They're not quite the only survivors of the Warren Commission. I've also been speaking to Lloyd Weinreb, who became a professor at Harvard Law School. As a young man, he joined the Commission staff quite late on. Lloyd Weinreb told me what to him the essential purpose had seemed of the Warren Commission at the time.
The Commission was to satisfy the public that the assassin had been apprehended, and as President Johnson promised, our job was to give overwhelming proof that we had the right person.
Doesn't that indicate that at some level a decision had already been made as to what the outcome should be?
Well, yes. The expectation was that Oswald was the assassin. Everyone thought that Oswald was the one who did it.
So is there any validity in the criticism that the material that the Commission members were supplied was itself slanted to give a particular verdict?
I don't think so. The Commission and the staff, more particularly, did its work and came up with the results that it did as conscientiously as it could. It would have taken an extraordinary conspiracy to cover up our findings. The second thing I would say is that after I joined the faculty at Harvard the following year, I was asked often to talk about the Warren Commission. And when I did, I came to believe that there are essentially two kinds of people. There are people for whom immense coincidences are the ordinary features of ordinary life, that cosmic coincidences happen. There are some other people who have a deep felt desire to believe that things don't happen without purpose. You take one view or the other, and that will dictate your response to the outcome of the Warren report. I'm comfortable with coincidence. I think many, many people are deeply uncomfortable with saying, well, that's the way it is and going on. So they come up with some sort of conspiratorial motion.
You're still proud of the report and you're still proud of your part in it?
Proud of it? No, I'm not proud of it. I think it was in many ways a dreadful report, but I have no doubt about the result. The work of the Commission got confused between a criminal trial where you have a verdict and an historical investigation where you have someone working very hard, producing a book. It wasn't clear which it was. Most of the people on the staff were lawyers, used to pushing toward a verdict, and that's the end of it. But there was no trial. And so I think there was a little bit of confusion about what we were working towards. I think it was a great mistake to say, as President Johnson did, we will give you absolute certainty. An historian would have had more sense and would have said the historical record is always a little bit confused. The report was thrown together at the end because we were working under such desperate conditions. It really was a little bit chaotic at the end. Johnson was desperate to get the report out because people thought he was holding it back, which was not true. We really were doing the best we could, but the circumstances didn't allow us to sit back and reflect.
Lloyd Weinreb. In Sam Stern's phrase, which we heard a little earlier, the job for the Warren Commission in 1964 was to create a report bulletproof to criticism. But people have been taking aim at the Warren Commission and its way of working, its mindset and its conclusions ever since. Yet no one has yet disproved the narrative it established in such detail all those years ago in the mind of America.
Really?
Thank you.
That explains those polls.
Who was the presenter?
Vincent.
Vincent Daele.
Williozzi. Yeah. But I mean, it was
Junior.
listening to.
Investigation.
I mean, Mike said something in his presentation. Yeah, down it was. Yeah.
So much for the girl on
Mike,
the stage.
you said earlier, a political reason for the rejection of evidence, not a scientific one. And of course, you get this, and when you said that, one thing sprang to mind, and that's Admiral Berkeley's death certificate for JFK, which the Warren Commission never bothered to avail themselves of for inclusion in the report.
They never availed themselves of any of the photographs and x-rays either.
Precisely.
And they relied on bogus drawings. Now, we've heard so much about that at Canterbury over the years. The, what's his name, the guy, Skip Rydberg, who was told to make those drawings showing you know, a wound at the back of Kennedy's neck, and then another one of the throat, that being that bullet transmitted. And that was total fiction, and they had...
But he didn't see anything, did he? It was described...
But Admiral Berkeley's death certificate put the non-fatal wound in Kennedy's back at the third thoracic vertebra, which is why the Commission didn't want it, because they couldn't make them line up with a single bullet
or something wrong. But don't forget that it turns out, years later, we found that this change from back to neck was Gerald Ford's change of wording in the Warren report itself.
But it was interesting because in 1967, Berkeley was asked to give an oral history to the presidential library, the Kennedy Library, and he was asked whether he, what his view was about the Warren Commission's conclusions on the shooting. And I think he was very instructive when he tersely answered, "I would not care to be quoted on that point." So it's very powerful. But of course, then you think, well, right, okay, so how was he kept in the fold? Lyndon Johnson boosted him up to Vice Admiral from Rear Admiral. And he was only the second presidential physician to have enjoyed that status. So, you know, a bit of gilding the lily there for him, and yeah, exactly.
Keep your gob shut, I'll look after you. And Sam Stern there is supposed to be investigating presidential security for the Warren Commission. 27 volumes or whatever. There's no mention of that Dallas was the fourth set up for assassination of Kennedy in November '63.
Yeah, Chicago.
Following Chicago and Miami. I think the third one was it San Antonio? I'm not sure. Policarpo was the guy in there anyway. But Chicago had a motorcade, a complete mirror of Dallas, with a warehouse, shooters, and a patsy. And the patsy was an ex-Marine, and he was training Cuban exiles in off New York.
Did I hear somewhere recently that his name was Lee? Have I got that from someone? Someone who warned of a pre-assassination in one of those cities.
I think it was an informer on the Chicago one, I think.
Is that what I got from you?
Yeah, it wasn't the guy who won the Patsy name.
Wasn't it
the
the
informer?
guy who was caught with weapons in his car, and that's why the trip to Chicago was cancelled. Because some right wing, I think he may have been an ex-Marine, but by accident he was just stopped routinely, and they found weapons. What have you got these for?
Loads of them, yeah.
Yeah. It's quite funny that, I mean, that last character did admit, yes, you know, we started off with the presumption that Oswald is, you know, because that's plainly evident. Because he said, you know, earlier on he said, were you too willing to rely on the fact that Oswald acted alone? I mean, the presumption was that Oswald acted at all, that they were prepared to.
Well, I mean, it's such a shame that Bart isn't with us, because of course he'd be effing and jeffing right now saying, well, what the fuck are you on about? Fucking Oswald was standing in the fucking doorway and nothing to fucking do with it. Sorry, I'm just speaking, sorry.
No, I was going to say, over the, I've probably read, I suspect, more testimony than anybody, just because of my legal background. That's what I've always been interested in. And over the years, I tried to rank, if you like, who I thought were the most genuine, asking the right questions, who was the best
of the council.
The council. Yeah. So in my humble opinion, the worst and the most we should question most is Joseph Ball, and the best is actually Howard Willens, who genuinely did do some really good research, who didn't believe the FBI and argued. So for one example I can remember off the top of my head is about how quickly in New Orleans Oswald got his passport. So Willens, against everything he was told, went actually to the main the passport office to look into it in something, and was very suspicious when he saw NO written. He got the original paperwork. He saw NO was written in the thing. They thought, no. So why has Oswald been given a passport this quickly when it says no? And then he called somebody, and the NO actually stands for New Orleans. It wasn't no, but he genuinely looked into it and didn't listen to, we don't need to do that. You've been told this by the Justice Department, which actually he had the passport. So he did various things, and he was involved in some stuff for Mexico City as well. That so I, in my opinion, he wasn't completely. Just blindfolded. He was one of the better ones.
And what was the name? Sorry, there was one middle-ranking attorney who had a New York practice, and by March of By March of '64, he'd upped and left. He knew the writing was on the wall. He could see the way that this was going, and he didn't want to be associated with it. Made his excuses and left.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I
can't bring his name to mind.
Because
didn't pass a smell test for it.
Were there a couple of official dissenters
got
to
rid
the
of
one?
him, actually.
Sorry.
Were there a couple of official dissenters from
There's a recorded
yes.
discussion between LBJ and Russell. He says, I don't believe it, and she says,
No,
I don't.
And 4 of the 7 committee members were harboured some scepticism about the basic fact.
How they got over that was that Hal Boggs and Gerald Ford were the two that were talking about the wording, and they came to an agreement by only about changing the wording of it in various points, and the two of them were quite good friends.
To any of the confusion.
Yes, presumably of.
So that they, despite the fact that Boggs suspected that there was some other things happening.
They were also talking about Oswald and CIA links, and that they mentioned on there that they didn't find anything. But what about George de Mohrenschildt and George W. Bush? It's not a theory. There's letters between the two.
I don't suppose they looked too hard, though, did they?
No. They just are there. Oh Christ, they're now.
That's the thing.
Isn't there also a link between Mrs. Zapruder and the de Mohrenschildt family? Isn't there some link there? Did she work with them or something?
Yeah, yes, she was a designer at one point, wasn't it? So she was within the garment industry. Like any industry, it's quite small.
There was some link with George.
Because he's married to Jean, who was a former designer who was friends with, but purely because of the industry. I'm not sure if there's
nothing.
I think it's one of those things that is about.
No marriage and nothing.
Well, possibly, but it's probably more down to our industry.
The last commission lawyer, what he said there virtually mirrors what's in Yes Minister when he says, you never start a governmental inquiry unless you know the outcome before. Essentially, that was what we said.
Yeah, Alan Weisberg got hold of, I think it was a draft contents, so this was sort of like the format that they were following. So it was before any witnesses were taken, and it was just like, the shooting, subheading, number of shots, and then it listed them 1, 2, 3. Before they'd taken any, before they'd even started, they'd already said it's 1, 2, 3 shots. So it already been decided. The
same with the Katzenbachman.
Probably
must
be
convinced
report. And that was within a few days, wasn't it?
2 days.
Yeah, ridiculous. I didn't he become the new Attorney General? Did he replace Bobby Kennedy? Katzenbach did. Yeah,
But
shock horror probe.
There isn't some of the clue in the fact it's a commission. I'm sure all of us have been, and I certainly was, I was a member of a 13, should have been known better, a person commission for a company I worked for, and you've got to go with, I've never agreed on some of the bits, but you're going along with the consensus. You're never going to be happy. Yeah, so-called democracy.
I know, because you've got Gerald Ford there, who's Hoover's stooge, he's just reporting back to Hoover.
Yeah.
And then the FBI are leaking the conclusions of the report to their press assets.
Well, of course, well, it's as Jason would put it, predictive programming, get everyone already aware of what the outcome's going to be. Except and just keep on, and they've been doing it for the last 50-odd years, even since then.
And then Ford had the temerity to feign shock at it. It's disgusting that it's appearing in the press before we issued our conclusions. How can this be?
The strangest thing, because some of those fabulous tapes, is that Hoover didn't actually know. It's not as if Hoover knew Ford before that. It's not as if,
it's not like his and Johnson's relationship.
No. I mean, Hoover and LBJ actually had conversations about, well, who is this Ford? They truly really didn't know who he was.
Yeah. What was the name of the pamphlet that Dulles handed out beforehand?
Oh,
stating that all assassins were known nutters.
Yeah, they're all in close quarters with a handgun, not with a rifle.
What was it called?
I've got it googled down somewhere. It was a book. It wasn't a pamphlet. It was a book that he issued them all. There isn't a copy in the National Archives with the commission papers.
He obviously wasn't trying to influence the other commission.
No.
Did it never focus on the fact that Lincoln was a conspiracy?
Well, Kennedy was wrong to sack him. Let's get real here. He was a lovely man.
Well, that was far better than Hancock. That was fantastic. Great half hour, that one. Thank you very much indeed.